Disclaimer: the following story is a work of fiction inspired by paranormal folklore and urban legends. While the story features a celebrity figure, Katie Price, this portrayal is entirely fictional and does not reflect her real-life experiences, beliefs, or character. The mansion, events, and supernatural occurrences described are products of creative storytelling meant solely for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to real locations, people, or events is purely coincidental. This story is not endorsed or authorized by Katie Price or any related parties. After years of tabloid drama, public scrutiny, and relentless paparazzi, Katie Price longed for something different: peace, solitude, a fresh start. When she first saw the sprawling 18th-century mansion tucked away in the British countryside, it felt like fate. The ivy-covered stone walls, grand iron gates, and sweeping lawns whispered elegance and escape. It was everything her heart desired, a place to finally breathe. The estate, known locally as Ravencrest Manor, had been on the market for years. Locals said it was cursed, but Katie laughed it off. "People will say anything about a big old house," she told her manager. The price was shockingly low for such a property, but Katie saw it as a bargain. She envisioned a life of morning tea on the terrace, her kids running through the halls, and cozy fireside evenings away from the madness of London. Moving day was hectic. Her children were both excited and nervous, especially Princess, who didn't like how quiet the area was. "It feels like it's watching us," she whispered as she stepped through the creaky front door. Katie brushed it off. "You've been watching too many horror films, sweetheart," she joked, pulling her daughter into a hug. The house was cold, even in summer. But she figured it was just the old plumbing and thick stone walls. Katie brought a small team with her, a housekeeper named Julia, a live-in nanny, and her longtime personal assistant, Dean. They helped arrange furniture, unpack boxes, and settle into the rhythm of the new home. At first, things seemed perfectly normal. The kids loved their rooms, the garden was blooming, and the isolation brought a strange but welcome calm. For the first time in years, Katie felt safe. But the calm didn't last. It started with little things. The lights would flicker every time Katie entered the hallway. The thermostat never held its temperature, especially in her bedroom, where it always felt 10 degrees colder than the rest of the house. One morning, her assistant Dean swore he saw someone standing at the top of the stairs, an old woman in a long gown. But when he rushed up, no one was there. He chalked it up to exhaustion. Katie remained unfazed. "You lot are just jumpy," she laughed, trying to keep the mood light. But deep down, a small part of her wondered if something was off. Her dreams grew stranger. She'd wake up in a sweat, heart pounding, certain someone had whispered her name. The kids started complaining about creaking footsteps outside their rooms at night. Julia found doors open that she was sure she'd locked. The dog refused to go near the basement door. Still, Katie stayed positive. She filled her Instagram with smiling selfies in the garden, videos of baking with her children, and before and after shots of her renovation projects. But behind the smiles, unease was growing. On more than one occasion, she thought she heard a child crying at night, though both her kids were sound asleep. By the end of the first month, Katie had to admit it, something was wrong with the house. During a late-night phone call with an old friend, she finally voiced it. "I don't know, babe. It's like the house doesn't want us here. Like we're not alone." Her friend told her to burn some sage or maybe call a priest, half joking. But Katie wasn't laughing. Still, she refused to leave. She had worked too hard, fought too much, and lost too many battles to run away now. This was her sanctuary. If there was something wrong with the mansion, she would find out what it was and face it head-on. Little did she know, the house had been waiting for someone like her. It was only a few weeks after settling into Ravencrest Manor that the oddities went from subtle to impossible to ignore. At first, it was the whispers, barely audible, like a radio left on in another room. Katie would walk down the hallway late at night and hear something murmuring just beyond her range of understanding. Sometimes it sounded like her name. Other times it was a soft giggle, as if a child were hiding in the shadows. But every time she turned to catch the source, there was nothing. Her children began to notice too. Princess, always the more sensitive of the two, started refusing to sleep in her room. She claimed someone kept standing at the foot of her bed, never moving, never speaking, just watching. Katie reassured her, insisting it was just a bad dream, but her daughter's pale face and sleepless nights began to wear on her. Junior, on the other hand, pretended to be brave, but even he admitted he didn't like going to the upstairs bathroom alone anymore. Julia, the housekeeper, was next to experience the unease. She told Katie that every morning she'd find the chairs in the dining room moved into strange positions, sometimes all facing the windows, other times arranged in a perfect circle. At first, she blamed the kids or maybe the movers, but one morning she found a dusty handprint on the inside of a second-story window. No one had touched that window in weeks. Dean, always the skeptic, tried to keep spirits high. "It's just an old house," he said. "They creak and groan. Pipes make noises. That's all." But even he couldn't explain the fact that the CCTV cameras kept glitching every night between 2:14 and 2:17 a.m. When they played the footage back, the screen went completely black for 3 minutes, every single night, at the exact same time. Katie, still refusing to give in to panic, decided to call in a repairman to check the electrical wiring. But nothing unusual was found. "Your system's clean," the technician said. "Wiring is old, but nothing that would cause this." He left looking confused, mumbling something about strange energy. It wasn't just the whispers. The house itself began to feel reactive. Doors opened on their own, sometimes slamming shut behind people as if in anger. The lights in the main hallway would flicker in a sequence, as if someone were walking beneath them, triggering them one by one. Cold air would sweep through rooms with no windows open. The thermostat showed normal temperatures, but the feeling was bone deep. One night, Katie sat in the living room scrolling through her phone when the chandelier above her began to sway. There was no wind, no movement in the room, but it creaked back and forth like something unseen had just brushed past it. Katie stood up slowly, her instincts alert. "Hello," she called out, her voice thin. The chandelier stilled. The moment passed. But the feeling that someone or something was watching her did not. Julia began lighting candles in the rooms and leaving small crosses tucked into the corners of the windows. "Just to feel safe," she said, but her voice trembled. The dog, normally playful and affectionate, refused to go near the western corridor of the house. Every time someone tried to drag it past, it would whimper and dig its paws into the floor. Then came the night that changed everything. Katie woke at exactly 2:16 a.m. The house was still. Too still. Not even the creaks of the walls echoed through the dark. She reached for her phone, but it was completely dead. Odd, since it had been charging all night. As she sat up, she heard it, whispering, right outside her bedroom door. This time, it wasn't faint. It was clear. It was speaking her name. "Katie. Katie." She froze, heart pounding, listening. The voice sounded like her mother, but her mother had passed away 2 years earlier. The door handle began to turn, ever so slowly. Katie stumbled backward off the bed, her breath shallow. But just as the door creaked open, the whisper stopped. Nothing stood in the doorway. No one entered. The next morning, Katie gathered everyone in the kitchen. She didn't want to alarm her kids, but she could see it in their eyes. They felt it too. Something was in the house. Watching. Listening. And it wasn't going away. Katie had explored almost every room in the mansion except one. A peculiar, locked chamber on the 3rd floor. The door was thick, painted over in layers of dust and time, and for weeks she had ignored it. But after the voices, the cold drafts, and her daughter's increasing terror, curiosity finally overcame hesitation. One afternoon, as the children played outside and Julia tidied the kitchen, Katie retrieved the large iron key she had found tucked inside a drawer in the study, one she had long forgotten. The key fit perfectly. The door creaked open, exhaling stale air that hadn't moved in years. The room beyond was dimly lit by a single arched window, its light filtered through grime. What caught Katie's attention immediately was not the furniture, though antique and beautiful, nor the faded floral wallpaper peeling from the corners. It was the mirrors. Dozens of them. The walls were covered in old, gilded mirrors of all shapes and sizes. Tall ones, round ones, some cracked, some pristine. They reflected each other endlessly, creating a dizzying effect. It was like standing in a tunnel of reflections. Katie stepped inside slowly, her heels tapping softly on the wooden floor. Each mirror echoed her image back at her from slightly different angles. Some seemed to show her moving slower. Others didn't reflect her at all. One particular mirror stood out. It was nearly ceiling height, set in an ornate frame carved with roses and thorns. Unlike the others, its surface shimmered strangely, like water beneath glass. As Katie stood before it, her reflection stared back. But something was off. Her lips weren't moving when she spoke. In fact, the reflection smiled even though Katie hadn't. A chill ran down her spine. She backed away, glancing around the room uneasily. A floorboard creaked behind her, though she was alone. She turned, but the room was still. No sound. No movement. Yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching her from within the mirrors. Later that evening, she told Dean about the discovery. He climbed the stairs to check it himself, flashlight in hand. When he returned, his face was pale. "That room, it's not just weird. It feels wrong," he muttered. "Like it remembers something." Julia crossed herself when she heard about it. "You shouldn't have opened that room," she whispered. "They say mirrors trap souls. Old mirrors especially. If something bad happened there, it could still be inside." Katie laughed nervously, trying to shake the superstition. But deep down, she wasn't so sure. She began having vivid nightmares, dreams where she wandered through endless mirrored corridors, chased by a dark figure whose face she couldn't see. She'd wake up sweating, heart racing, her bedroom mirror fogged over despite no moisture in the air. A few days later, Princess came crying to her mother. "Mummy, I saw a lady in my mirror. She was behind me, but when I turned, she wasn't there." Katie's stomach turned cold. That night, she covered every mirror in the house with sheets. But the mirror room stayed untouched. Something inside her warned her not to disturb it again, yet it also lured her back, as if it were calling. One afternoon, Katie invited a psychic medium named Isla, a woman she had once met at a television event, to visit the house. Isla entered the mirror room and immediately gasped. "This room is a gateway," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Someone used this space for spiritual work. Rituals. Maybe summoning or trapping." Her hands hovered over the tallest mirror. "There's something inside this one. Something that doesn't want to leave." She performed a reading and told Katie of a woman who once lived in the mansion, a former owner from the 1800s named Eliza Hargrave. Obsessed with vanity and spiritualism, Eliza was rumored to have used mirrors to speak with the dead. Her death was mysterious. Some said she vanished during a séance. Others believed she never left the room. Katie listened in stunned silence. The stories, the whispers, the reflections, they all pointed to this room. "Whatever is in that mirror," Isla warned, "it's aware of you now." That night, Katie stood in front of the mirror one last time, heart racing. She watched her reflection carefully, searching for the oddities that had haunted her for days. As she turned to leave, she saw it. The reflection didn't turn with her. It just stood there, smiling, watching. The door slammed shut behind her. And, for the first time, Katie wasn't sure if she had made it out, or if something else had come with her. The events in the mirror room had shaken Katie more than she cared to admit. Ever since the encounter, she felt as though something invisible had attached itself to her, lingering just out of sight. She found herself constantly glancing over her shoulder, hesitating before looking into any reflective surface. The mansion felt heavier now, as if the very air had thickened with an unseen pressure. No longer could she chalk it up to a creaky old house. Something was actively present and growing bolder. A week later, the storm came. The day had been calm, even sunny, but as night fell, dark clouds gathered unnaturally fast over Ravencrest Manor. By 10 p.m., the wind howled like a chorus of wailing voices, rattling the windows and shaking the ancient wooden frames of the house. Power flickered and then died completely. The emergency generator should have kicked in, but it didn't. The mansion was swallowed by darkness. Katie lit candles, placing them around the house as she moved room to room, checking on her children and staff. Princess and Junior were asleep, thankfully undisturbed. Julia had locked herself in her room, praying silently, while Dean was downstairs trying to call for help, though all the phones were dead. Even the battery-powered ones. Katie returned to her room, trying to stay calm. She sat on the edge of her bed, watching the candle flame flicker unnaturally, as if something unseen were passing through the room. Then she heard it, her name. Clearly this time. No wind, no whispers. Just a deep, disembodied voice calling softly but firmly, "Katie." She froze, every nerve on edge. The voice was low, male, and right outside her door. She stood, grabbing a heavy candle holder as a makeshift weapon. "Who's there?" she called, but there was no answer. Then the doorknob began to turn. Slowly, deliberately. She stepped back, holding the candle aloft, heart racing. The door creaked open, but no one stood there. Just the dimly lit hallway and a cold draft that snuffed out her candle in an instant. Total darkness. Katie stumbled backward, blindly reaching for her phone. Nothing. Dead. Suddenly, she heard footsteps. Slow and heavy, coming down the hallway toward her room. They stopped just at the threshold. She held her breath. Then, scratching. Long, deliberate scratches on the inside of the wall. Behind the headboard. The sound of fingernails dragging against wood. And then, laughter. A raspy, broken laugh, too distorted to be human. In a panic, she ran to her children's room. They were still asleep, untouched. She pulled them into her room, locked the door, and lit another candle. Just as she did, she noticed something new, writing scratched into the inside of her closet door. Words. Deep, angry slashes carved into the wood. "Get out." Dean finally burst in 15 minutes later, pale and breathless. "The basement," he said. "Something's moving down there. I swear to God I saw it. It was crawling." Katie ordered everyone into one room for the night. They locked the doors, blocked the windows, and tried to keep the children calm. But sleep was impossible. Every few minutes, they heard something slam or whisper or drag across the floor above. At 3:03 a.m., the house fell completely silent. And then, every mirror in the house shattered at once. The noise was deafening. Windows rattled, furniture shook. Katie screamed and shielded her children. When they opened the door in the morning, glass coated the floors like snow. Even the mirrors that had been covered in cloth had exploded. The mirror room? The mirrors there were untouched, but now every single one of them reflected something behind the viewer, no matter where they stood. And it always looked like the same figure, a tall woman in black, her face shadowed, her eyes glowing faintly. Katie knew now, this was no coincidence. This wasn't her imagination. The house wasn't just haunted, it was alive. Intelligent. And it had chosen to reveal itself. The whispers had turned into a voice. The voice had made contact. And it was only just beginning. The day after the mirrors shattered, Katie Price knew she couldn't ignore the truth any longer. The entity in her home wasn't a passing presence or some residual haunting. It was intelligent, aggressive, and deliberate. Whatever had made contact the night before had chosen to escalate, and it had succeeded. The fear it planted now lived in every room. For the safety of her children and her own sanity, Katie decided to do something she hadn't considered before: find out the truth about Ravencrest Manor. With Dean's help, she started digging. At first, they found the usual property records, deeds, architectural plans, old family names tied to the land. But the deeper they went, the darker it got. The house had gone through more than a dozen owners in its 200-year history, but strangely, most of them didn't stay long. Several sales were recorded as urgent or undisclosed, and many of the families had left without explanation. In one case, an entire family vacated the property and never sold it. They simply abandoned it. But that wasn't the worst of it. Katie contacted a local historian named Malcolm Travers, who agreed to meet her at a nearby cafe. When she mentioned the mansion's name, Malcolm's expression changed immediately. He leaned in and spoke softly. You live in that house? Ravencrest? I didn't think anyone lived there anymore. Katie explained what had been happening. Malcolm nodded grimly. There's a reason the locals avoid that place, he said. It used to be something else. Before it was a private residence, it was known as the Black Hollow Sanatorium. Katie blinked in disbelief. A sanatorium? For what mental health? Malcolm nodded. Among other things. The original owner, Dr. Elias Hargrave, converted it in the late 1800s. He was a respected physician publicly, but behind closed doors, it said he performed unapproved treatments and experiments on his patients. Dozens died under his care, and the bodies were buried in unmarked graves on the property. When the authorities finally shut him down, they found journals filled with disturbing notes, obsessions with the afterlife, using mirrors to contain madness, and attempts to communicate with the souls of the dead. Katie felt cold all over. Eliza Hargrave, she said slowly. Is that his wife? Malcolm's eyes widened. Yes. How do you know that? She's in the house, Katie said softly. Or something claiming to be her. She's in the mirrors. Malcolm told her the legend. After Elias died under mysterious circumstances, Eliza was left alone in the manor. She became increasingly reclusive and was rumored to hold seances in the mirror room, trying to reach her husband. She was last seen during a thunderstorm, standing in front of the tall mirror, weeping. She vanished that night. Locals claimed she stepped into the glass and never came back out. No body was ever found. Katie returned home with her head spinning. That night, she descended into the basement with Dean. Neither had dared go down before, but now they had no choice. The basement was colder than the rest of the house, the air thick with the scent of mildew and something far older, something rotten. They found rusted hospital gurneys, broken furniture, and disturbing remnants of the house's former use, leather restraints, cracked jars with yellowed labels, and a rusted iron door locked shut. Behind that door was a sealed chamber, low-ceilinged and windowless. Inside, scrawled across every wall, were mirror-like symbols. And in the center, a cracked mirror sat on a rusted stand. This was a ritual space. Katie realized then, the house wasn't just haunted, it was a prison. A place built to hold something. Or someone. Dr. Hargrave had tried to contain the madness he created. Eliza had tried to reconnect with him, and paid the price. Back upstairs, Katie found Princess sitting in front of her vanity, staring into the mirror with a blank expression. Sweetheart, she said gently. Princess turned slowly. Her voice was cold. She says you don't belong here. Katie's blood ran cold. Who says that? She whispered. The lady in the mirror, Princess replied. She wants us to leave. Or she'll make us stay, forever. That night, Katie made a decision. She would not let her children suffer. She would not let the spirit, Eliza, or whatever it was, take control of their lives. If this house had a curse, she was going to break it. But breaking the curse would come at a cost. The night after learning the truth about Ravencrest's dark past, Katie Price barely slept. The historian's words echoed in her mind: unethical experiments, mirror rituals, a woman who disappeared into glass. The house no longer felt like a place she owned. It felt like a living organism, ancient and cruel, with secrets buried in its bones. And now it was reacting, lashing out in ways far more terrifying than before. That week, everything escalated. Katie began losing time. At first, it was subtle, waking up in different clothes, forgetting phone calls or conversations. Then it grew stranger. She'd find herself in different parts of the mansion, unsure how she got there. Once, she woke up standing in front of the mirror room's door, her hand already gripping the knob. Another time, she was discovered by Dean, crouched in the basement, mumbling phrases in a language she didn't recognize. Dean tried to downplay it, but Katie could see the fear in his eyes. You've been sleepwalking, he said. Probably just stress. It's been intense lately. But it was more than that. Much more. Julia, the housekeeper, found bruises on Katie's wrists one morning, finger-shaped, as if someone had grabbed her with force. But Katie had no memory of struggling with anyone. The children started avoiding her. Princess said her mother's eyes looked different, sometimes darker, like someone else was inside. The staff grew uneasy. Julia insisted they leave. Dean begged Katie to see a doctor, but Katie refused. If this house wants a fight, she said coldly, it's going to get one. That bravado didn't last. One evening, during a quiet dinner, Katie abruptly stood from her seat and began speaking in a low, guttural voice. Her head tilted back, eyes unfocused. She whispered in rhythmic patterns, naming names no one recognized. Julia gasped and clutched her cross. Dean grabbed her shoulder to snap her out of it, and Katie hissed at him like an animal, eyes wide and furious, then collapsed to the ground. When she awoke, she had no memory of it. Dean brought in a spiritual healer the next morning, a friend of Isla's who specialized in energy cleansing and spiritual attachments. The woman walked through the house, pausing most at the mirrors, especially the tall one in the ritual room. She said the veil between the living and the dead had been violently torn open, and something had latched onto Katie, feeding on her energy, testing her limits. It's a possession in stages, the healer warned. It hasn't fully taken over, but it's trying. She gave Katie a protective charm to wear around her neck, a small pendant containing black tourmaline and sage ash. For a while, it seemed to help. The sleepwalking stopped, the bruises faded, and her voice returned to normal. But then came the night of the live stream. Katie had agreed to go live on Instagram for a charity event, hoping to distract herself and return to some sense of normalcy. She set up her phone in the sitting room, surrounded by candles for ambience. For the first 10 minutes, everything went smoothly: laughs, lighthearted banter, fans excited to see her. But then, as she answered a viewer's question, her expression changed. Her voice dropped. She stared into the camera and said, "They're watching you now. Through this. Through me." The feed glitched violently. Thousands of viewers saw it, the flickering lights, the shadowy figure passing behind her, the way her eyes turned glassy and blank. She froze for a full minute. And then the screen cut to black. The video went viral. People joked that it was a stunt, a publicity trick. But those who knew Katie personally saw the truth. That night, Dean found her curled in a corner, whispering Eliza's name over and over. The mirrors around the house began reappearing, pieces of the ones that had shattered, now mysteriously whole again, like the house was rebuilding its defenses. Katie couldn't avoid her reflection anymore. No matter where she looked, the woman in black stared back. And now, the children were being affected. Princess began drawing disturbing images, figures with hollow eyes, rooms filled with mirrors, a tall woman standing behind their mother. Junior complained of nightmares and waking up with his mouth filled with dust. Even the dog, once loyal and protective, now cowered in corners, howling at empty walls. It was clear, the possession wasn't isolated to Katie anymore. The house was extending its reach, through her, around her, and into the people she loved most. They were running out of time. And if they didn't act soon, Ravencrest would claim them all. The atmosphere inside Ravencrest Manor had become unbearable. Every room echoed with unseen movement, every mirror reflected something more than just glass, and Katie Price felt her mind slipping inch by inch. The haunting had evolved from eerie disturbances into full-blown spiritual warfare. Katie no longer trusted her own thoughts. At times, she would feel someone else breathing through her lungs, moving her limbs, whispering through her mouth. And her children, once bubbly and full of life, were now pale shadows, tiptoeing around her as though she were a stranger. This was no longer just a haunting. It was a siege. Katie had no choice left. The house needed cleansing, and not the soft, symbolic kind. She needed something stronger. Desperate, she reached out again to Isla, the medium who had first identified the presence. Isla agreed to return, this time bringing reinforcements, a small team of spiritual experts, including a Catholic priest trained in exorcism rites, a Reiki healer, and an occult researcher. They arrived on a cloudy Thursday, armed with ritual tools, blessed water, protective crystals, herbs, and incense. Their plan was clear: perform a full spiritual cleansing of the property, with a specific focus on the mirror room and basement. Everyone in the house, including the children, would be anointed for protection. and Katie herself would be placed at the center of the ritual, as she was the primary target of possession. Before the ritual began, Isla pulled Katie aside. "This entity is ancient and territorial," she warned. "It doesn't want you here, but it doesn't want you to leave either. It's feeding off you. If it fights back, don't panic. Just hold on." By sundown, the ritual began. The group gathered in the mirror room, now cleared of furniture, but still lined with the glass sentinels that seemed to pulse with awareness. The priest began reading prayers, flicking holy water into each corner of the room. Isla chanted in a low, rhythmic voice, drawing symbols with chalk on the floor. The Reiki healer surrounded Katie with protective candles while the occult researcher murmured Latin incantations aimed at severing spiritual attachments. At first, everything was still. Then the air dropped 10 degrees in an instant. The candle flames bent sideways. A low groan echoed through the floorboards, like the house itself was grinding its teeth. The tallest mirror began to fog, not from the cold, but from something pressing against the other side. A pale handprint appeared, then another. And then a face. Eliza. Her features weren't clear, but the outline was unmistakable. Tall, dark-haired, eyes like coal. She watched silently from inside the glass, her mouth moving without sound. Suddenly, Katie clutched her head and screamed. "She's inside me," she cried, falling to her knees. "She doesn't want to leave." The candles extinguished all at once. Wind slammed through the room, though every window was shut. The chalk lines on the floor scattered as if scraped away by invisible claws. The mirrors began to vibrate violently. One shattered, then another. Dean and Julia, waiting in the hallway, rushed in, only to be thrown back by a gust of energy that knocked them to the floor. The priest continued shouting his prayers. Isla raised her arms, commanding Eliza to release Katie. The Reiki healer pressed her palms to Katie's back, channeling energy. Katie began convulsing, her mouth foaming, her eyes rolled back. Her voice morphed, no longer hers but guttural, foreign, furious. "You dare challenge me in my sanctuary," it growled. Then, the mirror behind her cracked, not shattered, but fractured down the center. A scream echoed, not from Katie, but from the glass itself. The air snapped like a whip. The figure of Eliza twisted and contorted, her face melting into darkness, her form pulled inward. Then silence. Katie collapsed. The remaining mirrors went dark, no reflections, no light. Just glass. When Katie awoke, her eyes were clear. Her breathing was steady. The heaviness in the room lifted, and the chill in the air receded. Isla, exhausted and trembling, looked around. "We did it," she whispered. "We pushed her back." But not everyone was convinced. The priest examined the largest mirror. "It's still cracked," he said. "She's wounded, but not gone. The portal was disrupted, not destroyed. That mirror is her anchor." Isla agreed. "It's weakened her, but the energy is still here. If provoked again, she could return. This house, it won't ever be clean." Katie understood. She hadn't won a war, only survived a battle. And though the entity had been forced back into the mirror realm, it now had something it never had before, a connection to the outside world. A tether. A witness. And Katie had become that tether. 2 weeks had passed since the violent exorcism attempt, and on the surface, things at Ravencrest Manor appeared calm. The air had warmed, the whispers had gone silent, and the mirrors, though cracked and clouded, no longer reflected shadowy figures or unnatural movements. Katie Price had resumed a small semblance of normal life, if such a thing were possible after what she had endured. But deep within, she knew the house had simply gone dormant. Not cured. Not cleansed. Just waiting. She decided to leave. There was no grand announcement, no paparazzi-worthy exit. Just quiet packing, tense goodbyes, and a cold, silent walk through the mansion one last time. She brought her children back to London, refusing to explain the full truth to them. They were too young to understand the weight of what they had survived. But they knew something had changed in their mother. She smiled less now, slept less, and she refused to have mirrors in the new house, every single one removed or covered. Before leaving, Katie visited the mirror room alone. The mirrors were still cracked, but they now reflected properly, no shadowy women, no strange movements. Yet the largest one, the ornate mirror with the roses and thorns, remained intact despite everything. A single vertical crack ran down its center, like a wound healing slowly. She stood before it for several minutes, heart pounding. The silence in the room was heavy, but not empty. Something still lingered behind that glass. She could feel it. "I'm not coming back," she said aloud, voice steady. "Whatever you are, whatever you want. I'm done." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, faintly, the mirror fogged over, just slightly, and a message appeared, as if written in breath from the other side. "You will." Katie turned and walked away without looking back. The mansion was put up for sale, though no buyer stepped forward. Word spread quickly through local circles about the priest, the shattered mirrors, the spiritualists who'd run out screaming one night. Even those who didn't believe in ghosts kept their distance. Ravencrest Manor became a place people whispered about but never visited. Months passed. Katie threw herself into her work, appearing in interviews and photo shoots, pretending to be fine. But she was different. Her eyes, once lively, now carried a wary edge. And every so often, fans noticed something strange in her selfies, reflections behind her that didn't quite match. A woman standing in a mirror when no one else was in the room. A flicker of shadow near her shoulder. A faint smile that didn't belong to her. She tried to ignore them. But at night, the dreams returned. The corridors. The mirrors. The voice. One dream always ended the same way. She stood in front of the tall mirror in the mansion. Her reflection would beckon, smile, whisper her name. And then, as she turned to run, the mirror would crack and the reflection would step out. She always woke up just before it touched her. One rainy evening, Dean called with news. "I drove past the manor today," he said quietly. "It's still empty." But one of the mirrors was visible through the window. "And?" Katie asked, her voice brittle. "I swear, it was glowing." Katie hung up without replying. That night, she walked to her bedroom, now in a new London flat, and paused at the only mirror left in her home, a small round one she used for makeup. She stared into it for a long time. Her reflection stared back, silent and still. Then, just before she turned away, her reflection blinked. But she hadn't. She stepped back, heart pounding. The curse hadn't stayed in the mansion. It had followed her. She realized the truth. Eliza didn't want the house. She wanted her. And through the bond that had formed during the exorcism, through the spiritual scars carved deep into her soul, Katie had become the new vessel. Ravencrest may be abandoned, but its influence lived on in her dreams, in her mirrors, in the spaces between. And one day, when the time was right, it would claim her again. Not through violence, but through invitation. All it needed was for her to look a little too long. And listen. 84.